If I say President Lyndon B. Johnson, Part 1, The Great Society, then you know that there's going to be more than one part. We're going to talk about the time that he finished Kennedy's administration. We're going to talk about his own administration. Then we're going to talk about his role in civil rights. The greatest civil rights president, in my mind, we ever had, under some tremendous pressure because he was a Southern Democrat and civil rights were not well thought of in the South. Trouble was the Vietnam War ruined him, and that's the third part, will be Lyndon Johnson and the Vietnam War. So we'll start today with the profile on Lyndon Johnson and tell you a little bit about this fella that you don't know a lot about other than the fact he's been Vice President of John Kennedy prior to his assassination. Okay? And you'll find that he'll have a lot different upbringing than John Kennedy did. Well, Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. And he was the oldest of 5 children. He was the oldest of 5 children. He had 1 brother and 3 sisters, but he was the oldest of 5 children. 1 brother and 3 sisters. When he was 5 years old, his family moved to nearby Johnson City, Texas, which was actually a town that was founded by his grandfather. So when Lyndon Johnson turned 5 years old, his family moved to nearby Johnson City, Texas, which was a town that was founded by his grandfather. Now in 1924, he graduated from high school at the age of 16. 1924, he graduated from high school at age 16. Now this was kind of interesting because in those days, it wasn't like you are now where everybody's going to college. Everybody's going to, go to college. We have the Hathaway Scholarship and everybody is going to go to college. In those days, it was kind of a privilege to go to college. Not a lot of people could afford to. And Lyndon Johnson's parents urged him to go to college, but he was not interested at the time. So the point I'm making, it was a little bit unusual for parents of low income to urge their kids to go to college because things weren't the same. The reason that you're able to go to college on financial aid, kiddos, is because of Lyndon Johnson. And we will talk about that later. So it's kind of ironic that even though his parents were not very wealthy, they urged him to go to college, but yet he was not interested. So he traveled to California with some friends to earn some money. Traveled to California with some friends to try to earn some money. Did not have a lot of luck in California with his buddies. You know how it is when your buddies are going somewhere to earn some money. I'm sure they spent more than they ever earned. And so because he didn't have any success earning much money, he returned back to Johnson City, Texas, and he found a job. So he and his buddies traveled to California, are going to make some big dollars, they think. More than likely, they spent more time fooling around than they did making any money. And because of that, Lyndon Johnson returns to Johnson City, Texas, and he gets a job. You know what his job was? For 8 hours a day, he shoveled dirt into dump trucks. That's what his job was. He was a laborer. He shoveled dirt into dump trucks. So he comes back to Johnson City, finds this outstanding big money-making job of shoveling dirt into dump trucks 8 hours a day. And finally he comes home one night and he says to his parents, you don't have to write this down, but he says to his parents, quote, I'm sick of working with my hands. I don't know if I can work with my brain, but I'm ready to try. So what's he going to want to do? Go to college. Well, he doesn't have any money, so he goes to the nearby Johnson City Bank, and I'm not making this up, and he borrows $75 so he can enroll at Southwest Texas Teachers College. That isn't how it works anymore, does it? So he gets tired of working, shoveling dirt into dump trucks 8 hours a day. He tells his parents, I'm sick of working with my hands. I don't know if I can work with my brain, but I'm ready to try. And so he goes to the nearby bank in Johnson City and he borrows $75 and enrolls in college at Southwest Texas Teachers College. So at this point he's going to become what, obviously, Macklin? A teacher. Well, he continues to go to school there and he graduates from Southwest Texas Teachers College and he goes to Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas, and he teaches public speaking. So he graduates from Southwest Texas Teachers College, gets a job at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas, and he teaches classes in public speaking. Oh, that'd be nice to have. And guess what, Harris? He coached a state-winning debate team while he was there at Sam Houston High School. So after college graduation, Johnson taught public speaking at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas, and coached a state-winning debate team there. Well, I don't know how his year went, but after just 1 year of teaching, he decided he would rather go into politics. So he quit his teaching job at Sam Houston High School. So after just 1 year of teaching, Johnson decided that he would rather be in politics, so he quits his job and tries to enter the world of politics. His first political position, if you want to call it that, was that of a congressional secretary. And he worked for a congressman by the name of Richard Kleberg, who is on your ID sheet. So Johnson's first political position, if you want to call it that, was that of a congressional secretary. Now that's not pigeonhole that term. That doesn't mean he sat at a desk and dictated notes and was a secretary. A congressional secretary was like what you'd call today maybe an aide, okay, a politician's aide. And he worked with a congressman from Texas by the name of Richard Kleberg. Congressman means, again, that he served in the House of Representatives, okay? So Johnson serves as a congressional secretary to Richard Kleberg, and he works for Kleberg from 1932 until 1937, almost 5 years. From 1932 to 1937, he serves as congressional secretary. Now, it was kind of a good experience for Johnson because Richard Kleberg was much more interested in the high life of his position. What do I mean by that? What's that? Dinner parties and cocktail parties and the PR part of it. And so who was doing really the nuts and bolts of the office? Lyndon Johnson. He practically ran Kleberg's office during that 5 years because the congressman was much more interested in the high life of the position rather than really getting anything accomplished. So really the guy doing the work, the groundwork for Kleberg, wasn't Kleberg, it was Lyndon Johnson. Okay? Kleberg was much more interested in all the cocktail parties and dinner parties and the society part of being a congressman, not so much getting anything done. Well, on September 12th of 1934, as he is a congressional secretary, he meets a very pretty young lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor. So during his time as a congressional secretary on September 12th, 1934, he meets for the first time a pretty young lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor. Now, Claudia Taylor was better known to her family and her close friends as Lady Bird. That's what they called her, Lady Bird. So this was not a nickname she got when her husband became president. This is a nickname she had from the time she was 12 years old. She happened to go to the doctor one time, and the nurse looked at her and smiled and said, "My goodness, you're just as pretty as a ladybird." For whatever reason, that stuck, and from that point on, her family and close friends referred to her as Ladybird Taylor, not Claudia. Well, Their first date, pay attention fellas, their first date was a breakfast date, followed by a long drive in the country, in which at the end of their first date, Johnson proposes to her. Oh yeah. Fast mover, baby. Fast mover. So on their first date, which was a breakfast date that included a long drive in the country, Johnson actually proposed to Lady Bird Taylor. First date. Well, let's see what she says. Although she really didn't want to rush into marriage, she did accept his proposal. Now that would tell you probably what, Dane? That she, she thinks she loves him, she wants to marry him, but she's not going to rush into it, so what's she going to do? Be engaged for a long time, you think. But, however, 10 weeks later, they were married on November 17th, 1934. 10 weeks later. And they married in San Antonio, Texas. Fast mover. Gives you a little bit of the idea of the persuasive nature of Lyndon Johnson, because that's what he was. Very persuasive man. November 17th, 1934. He's a mover and groover. 2 months he's got her married to him. Man, he must have been something. Well, on a sad note, Lady Bird has 3 miscarriages, but finally does give birth to 2 daughters. So after 3 miscarriages, the Johnsons give birth, so to speak, to 2 daughters. First one was Linda, L-Y-N-D-A. Linda, L-Y-N-D-A. She was born in 1944. And the second daughter was Lucy, L-U-C-I, born in 1947. What's better than that? Yeah, here they are right here. Remembering Daddy. There's 2 signatures of the 2 Johnson girls. Linda, L-Y-N-D-A, 1944, and Lucy, L-U-C-I, 1947. Well, after Lyndon Johnson got tired of being Congressman Kleberg's runabout, so to speak, in 1937, he decided to run for Congress himself. And what happened is a congressman by the name of James P. Buchanan had died in office. And so it opened that position, and when James P. Buchanan died in office, Johnson decided to run for his seat. And we'd be running only to do what? Only to fill his seat until election time came up, right? So it's a little bit of a gamble. You only get to finish his term, and then you got to run your own term, okay? But he thought it was an opportunity. So in 1937, Lyndon Johnson decides to run for Congress, attempting to fill the seat of James P. Buchanan, who had died in office. Well, he didn't have any money. And so Lady Bird provided the money for his campaign, $10,000. $10,000. Now this was inheritance from her mother's estate. So she inherited $10,000 from her mother when she died, and gave that $10,000 to Lyndon Johnson, gambling that he could win this seat. And if he wins it, he only is going to be there until the fella's term ends. So Lady Bird provided the money for Lyndon Johnson's campaign. She took $10,000 from an inheritance from her mother's estate to help her husband's political career. Well, he was successful. Won his election and replaced Buchanan in the House of Representatives from Texas. But what's he going to have to do in 1938? And he did, and he won. And what's he going to have to do in 1940? Run again, and he won. So after winning the seat to fill Buchanan's spot, and you remember the House terms are just 2 years, he was re-elected in 1938 and in 1940. But what he set his sights for in 1941, Senate. Okay, he wanted to run for the Senate. So in 1941, Johnson announces he's going to run for the United States Senate. Now, that's an odd year, 1941. Aren't these even years? What do you think happened? Somebody died again. A guy by the name of Morris Shepherd, who was a senator from Texas, also died in office, and Johnson thought this would be a good time to see if he could win that seat. Now, the difference between that seat and another seat, 41, if the term's going to be much longer, right? Okay, so he gets a chance to be senator for longer before he has to run for his own election. So in 1941, Johnson announces he's going to run for the United States Senate. Again, it would be for an unexpired term, this time of Senator Morris Shepherd, who had also died in office. Well, although Johnson campaigned hard, he lost this election and finished out his term in the House. So even though he tried very hard to win that Senate seat, he actually lost that election and returned to finish his term in the House. But what's going on in history right now? In 1941, World War II, Pearl Harbor. So, as everyone else did, the events of Pearl Harbor resulted in Johnson joining the United States Navy, where he earned the Silver Star for gallantry. So Johnson joins the United States Navy at the outbreak of World War II, and he eventually earns the Silver Star for gallantry. That's a big award, Silver Star. Big heroic award. Well, after World War II ended, the couple now were married. They purchased a radio station and later purchased a television station as well. So he came back from World War II and purchased a radio station, and then he also, with his wife, purchased a television station. And he also took their money that they made in those two endeavors and invested that in real estate, hoping to make enough money to do what, Morgan? What do you want to be? He wanted to run for another term shot at the Senate. So he and his wife invest in a radio. They buy a radio station, then they buy a television station. They take their profits, they invest in the real estate business, and they try to make enough money so that Lyndon Johnson can take another shot at the Senate. Now, this was an interesting election as well, because the competition wasn't going to be in the final election, it was going to be in the primary election. Now, if you know anything about elections, you should, from government, is that all the Democrats get together and decide who's going to run for Senate, and all the Republicans get together in Texas and decide, and then you have a primary election, and the winner of the Democratic primary runs against the winner of the Republican primary in the general election, and somebody's elected. Well, Johnson's competition in this Senate race isn't going to be in the general election, it's going to be in the Democratic primary, because everybody's stating whoever wins the Democratic primary will win the Senate seat. Well, the problem was Johnson's going to be running in the Democratic primary against former Texas Governor Coke Stevenson. And Coke Stevenson had retired as governor of Texas the year before and decided that he wanted to run now for the Senate. And so he's a Democrat, Lyndon Johnson's a Democrat, so these guys are going to have to face off against each other in the Democratic primary, with the winner more than likely easily winning this Senate seat because the Republican Party was weak in Texas. That's the story. So Johnson's going to be running against former Texas Governor Coke Stevenson. Stevenson had retired from office the year before, and Johnson again campaigns. I want you to write down the votes. Here's how many votes Coke Stevenson had in this election. This is Coke Stevenson. 494,104. 494,104. Here's how many Johnson had. 494,191. 494,191. So how many does he win by, math wizards? 87. Now, I only tell you this because as a result of this close election, Johnson received a nickname that he wasn't very hot on, Landslide Lyndon. And that was making fun of him because he didn't win by a landslide. He won by 87 votes. So he was given the nickname, which he really didn't like very much, Landslide Lyndon. And that stayed with him the remainder of his political career, not in a positive note. Now, he doesn't even hardly campaign for the general election and wins easily over the Republican candidate to become United States Senator from Texas. So after this close-fought 87 vote victory over Coke Stevenson, he doesn't do a whole lot of campaigning, and he is easily elected to the United States Senate in the general election. He defeated his Republican opponent more than 2-1. Okay, but nobody forgot Landslide Lyndon, just so you know. Well, in January of 1953, Johnson was elected Minority Leader of the Senate at the age of 44. Okay, in January of 1953, Lyndon Johnson was elected Minority Leader of the Senate, and he was just 44 years old. He became the youngest person in American history ever to serve as Minority Leader of the Senate at the age of 44. So again, in January of 1953, Johnson was elected Minority Leader of the Senate at the age of 44. He became the youngest person ever to serve as Minority Leader in American history. 2 years later, in January of 1955, at the age of 46, guess what he became?